Hello! You are watching Chapter 23 of my TearRing Saga Champions of Utena low turn count playthrough, and this chapter is one of the big ones. This video is the third longest video in the entire run, and that is including the final chapter with its extensive unskippable post-map cutscene. In my last LTC run of this game, this chapter was pretty chill and relaxed, but this time around we are going to have to do quite a lot of rushing, and that means that there's a lot to do and talk about in this chapter. But before that, we are heading back into the city of Blood one more time to pick up a few more skills. The units receiving skills this time around are Roger, Lionheart, and once again Plum. Roger and Lionheart are both picking up the Forester skill, because the next chapter is a forest map, and they are going to need the extra movement to get where they need to go to make the strategy work. And of course, the +10 hit in the void isn't going amiss either there. Plum, on the other hand, is going to be learning the Seafarer skill, which is not immediately useful, but is going to come up in the next couple of maps. So once again, I have to be grateful for the coin flipping minigame and all the gold that we got from it, because that is another 21,000 gold that we have to spend in order to get this low turn count as low turn as I can manage. So now I'm going to take this last opportunity to talk about the red topped building near the Seafarer house. This is one of the two forges in the game, and the other is in Fort Lyria. In this game, the forges allow you to forge together two items to get a third item, and there are 5 possible combinations in each different forge. The catch here is that you have to do the forge options sequentially, and you can only do them once each. And that turns the forges into a fairly extensive side quest on Holmes's route of the game. You can get some pretty good rewards from this side quest, including a second member key, which can allow you to access the Blood secret shop quite readily, or a second hammer and staff, which is always useful. Probably the most important reward from this, however, is the Blessed Bow, which is a very powerful 2 to 3 range bow that is effective against monsters as well as flyers. The only other way to get a Blessed Bow in this game is as a very rare random drop from Draco zombies, so it's really nice to be able to get one if you can. However, there are some fairly major issues with the forging side quest in this kind of playthrough. Firstly, in order to get into the Lyria Forge, we need to have a skirmish there because we cannot enter the city like we can in Blood. It is possible to get several of the good rewards by entering the town at Blood and then making good use of the single forced skirmish we have at Fort Lyria. So the second reason that I'm not doing it is that I have some important uses for some of the raw materials in the forging side quest, and the results of the forging side quest aren't good enough to save any turns for me. So in the end, that is an unfortunately superfluous mechanic. So let's turn to the preparations here. I have put all of these shields onto Lionheart so that he can survive. He is the least bulky of my cavalry who are going to be going together in a certain direction during the map, so he needs the shields more than anyone else. We'll also notice that I deployed Frau for this map. This is the chapter I mentioned where her flight alone is sufficient to help me save turns and contributes to a low turn of this map. This map is actually a defeat boss map, which you might think would make it very fast. We just dance Martel up to 1 round KO the boss. That is chapter 23 completed in 1 turn. Good game, thanks for playing. However, we are forced to take quite a few more turns because there are a couple of recruitable units on this map, and we have to wait around quite a long time for one of them. This is the first time in a while, actually, that my full recruitment requirement has cost us turns. My flyers appear to be flying off in a completely random direction where they can't be of any use, but rest assured there is of course a method to my madness here. This is to do with one of the recruits in this map. Her name is Bud, and I'll talk more about her when she shows up, but for now all you need to know is that I need to block off some spaces around where she appears on the map in order to low turn count this map. This is because there is another recruitable unit on this map. His name is Rishal, and he is being blackmailed into fighting for the enemies through threat on Bud's life. So only Bud is going to be able to recruit him to our side. In addition to the flyers, we also need to send all of our cavalry units up to the upper right part of the map where Bud is going to spawn in. That, however, leaves the rest of our units woefully undefended, as pretty much all of my good units are flying or cavalry. The absence of my frontliners makes the Pegasus riders who start behind the boss very, very scary for all of my squishy units. These guys all have javelins, so we can't counterattack them very well without my lance users. And also, more and more of them spawn every turn for the first 4 turns. So we're going to have to deploy some complicated strategies in order to make sure that none of our squishy units get killed by them swarming over us. On my first turn, I arranged my cavalry units to pull out as many of the enemies between Bud and Rishal as I possibly can, as well as wiping out one of the Pegasus riders on enemy phase with Naron. But they're not going to be able to contribute all that much to my squishy's survival on this enemy phase. There are some threatening enemies in that knot. In particular, there's an Arbalest guy who Naron is killing, and there was also an enemy with a halberd. So it's good that Naron didn't kill the armored knight he faced on enemy phase. Otherwise, he would have had a chance of death on future turns, thanks to the huge chunk that the halberd takes out of him. So the most durable of my unmounted units are going to have to take up a defensive formation here. Holmes is attacking an armored knight, seemingly to no purpose because he can't do damage, but what he's actually doing is working on breaking down that guy's shield. So there is a possible point to that. Shigen is going to be taking point on this defensive formation, and he will be completely fine thanks to the Dullahan. This map is pretty much the last opportunity we have to get some sing grinding done with Plum available to make it happen twice per turn. So I'm going to be doing that as much as possible, because I am cutting it rather fine on how soon Lyria is going to get to the benchmark that she needs to reach. The other thing that I am doing on this map is that for the first and only time in the run, I am going to be using a summoning staff. Because the enemy Pegasus riders cannot quite one-round KO any of our squishy units, having these revenants around means that they have alternate targets to go for, which prevents them from ganging up on people like Plum and Lyria, who have to be hanging around within their range. And notice also that these are Pegasus riders, not Pegasus knights. This means that they have a completely separate set of class bases to the playable Pegasus Knight class, and they also do not have Canto to harass us with. This is similar to how there are Lance and Bow Riders that are enemy-only classes. And it looks like I actually miscalculated here, because Shigen is about to be attacked by a Pegasus Rider, and I forgot to equip the Dullahan. So he is going to die here. But luckily we have the Dark Ruron, and we're going to be able to resurrect anyone with it shortly, so this isn't too much of a bother here. What's a bit more concerning is what is happening up with my cavalry, because Roger takes all 3 of these Pegasus Rider attacks and is barely hanging on at the end of the phase. He's actually the only one of my 3 cavalry units who is not able to counterattack them. so maybe I should have put the shields on him for this turn rather than on Lionheart. So more Pegasus riders spawn, and on this turn some actually spawn in the southeastern corner as well. And this is why I adjusted Frau and Martel's formation at the end of last turn. This allows Martel to fight the new Pegasus riders while leaving Frau able to fly out of their range completely. My cavalry units are now in a position to fight the Pegasus Knights in their spawn point at the castle, and that is going to relieve most of the pressure on my infantry units back at the starting point. These Pegasus riders are actually surprisingly slow for their class, and that means that none of my units get doubled by them. This is why they tend to go for the Revenants preferentially, because they are fast enough to double those, and it's also convenient because it means that most of my combat units are capable of doubling the Pegasus riders and killing them in one turn. So now that most of my strategy has been described for the time being, let's talk about the recruitable units, starting with the one who's actually on the map. Rishul is a mage, specifically the third different type of mage in the game, which can only use fire. This means that he is by far the most limited of the mages prior to promotion, but Rishul is still very good. For starters, he has a high base level of 8, so he's the only mage in the game who's going to see promotion in an LTC run. He starts with the Vantage and Terror skills, both of which are also quite nice to have, but Rishul's true strengths lie in the fact that he has a very powerful personal tome. This tome is called Sunflame, and it deals effective damage to monsters, making Rishul very effective at fighting those even before his promotion. It also has 1 to 3 range, which means he can outrange most enemies, but the really powerful part of it is that it gives him a bonus of plus 10 protection, making him far more bulky than he has any right to be. In addition to Sunflame, Rishul is bringing us a Meteor Tome, which has 2 to 5 range and is going to be handy for fighting at long distances. All in all, Rishul is a pretty amazing unit to have on our side, and we are going to be seeing quite a lot of use out of him. Now, back with the Scrub Squad, Lyria has been grinding through her singing still, and Holmes has been extremely useful due to his ability to one-round KO the Pegasus riders without taking a counterattack thanks to his brave crossbow. Meanwhile, Vega is now holding the choke point because Shigen isn't around to do it anymore, and the Shram's high critical rate has allowed him to clean out quite a few of these armored knights very effectively. Unfortunately, Shram is not able to counterattack at range to deal with the Pegasus riders, so we are still relying on those going for our Revenant summons rather than my squishies. Samson is perfectly capable of one-round KOing the Pegasus riders with his Tomahawk, but he can't take more than 2 hits from them, so it's not good if they attack him. Martel, on the other hand, is killing the Pegasus riders on her side of the map in one round using the Levin sword. She too can only take 2 hits from these guys, who have great lances rather than javelins, but she only faces 2 of them at a time, so she too is completely safe on this enemy phase. Rishul is attacking us, wasting a use of his Meteor Tome. It is impossible for me to avoid taking an attack from him at this point if I want to get to the upper right corner in time, and fortunately none of my units are at risk of dying, but Bud probably would be, so it's a good thing that Rishul's AI is set to never attack her even if she is within his range. The final wave of Pegasus riders has now spawned from within the castle, and that means we are running short on time to get into position for Bud's arrival. But thanks to Kanto, we are still able to take out several of these Pegasus riders before we use our full movement to go to the right with my cavalry units. I hesitated here for quite a long time, because Lionheart faces 3 listed critical from this Pegasus rider. That's only 1 true critical, but I didn't know the exact numbers at the time, and this has been a long chapter, so I really didn't want to risk a reset if I didn't have to. Fortunately though, that 1% critical did not end up going off, and we get through without incident. There are a few more reinforcements that we're going to have to deal with on this chapter, and they are nomads who spawn from the northwestern corner. The second wave of these nomads is actually designed to perfectly intercept Bud if you allow her to spawn at her normal spot, and then move her full move every turn. But fortunately, because we are hurrying her up significantly, we are going to finish the map before that second wave has the opportunity to appear. So I'd better describe what I mean by that. The distance between Bud's spawn point and the tile adjacent to Rishal is such that her final move towards Rishal will be a half move rather than a full one. That means that if we block her regular spawn point as well as enough of the alternate spawn points around it, we are able to force her sufficiently out of position at spawn so that we actually end up saving a turn just from that. The reason that we need all 5 of these units to go over there is that Bud prefers to spawn south from her starting point rather than west, and we need her to go as far west as possible in order to achieve this turn save. But that's still a few turns away, and we also need to make sure that the way is clear for her to walk up to Rishal, and that means we need to deal with these last few enemies. I'm not completely sure why I went for the Levin Sword with Vega against this Pegasus rider, because it also means that Lyria is not receiving a dance on this turn, but Vega gets danced instead, and that means that the Pegasus rider is still dead at least. That takes the pressure off my infantry units for now, but there are still a couple more enemies that we have to clear out, which would be between Bud and Rishal. The bow enemy is going to be baited out by our 1 remaining Revenant, which is as good a use as any for him, and the remaining Pegasus riders are going to pursue my cavalry units to the east, rather than heading down towards my infantry units. Unfortunately, that doesn't mean my troubles are over, because the nomad reinforcements that I mentioned earlier are about to appear, and they are going to move pretty much directly into Bud's path. Fortunately, Samson has extremely good combat against these nomads. He is able to 1-round KO them using the Tomahawk, and that means that he can deal with some of them on enemy phase. Holmes has his Brave Crossbow to fall back on too, but it's still going to be pretty tight dealing with these nomads before Bud shows up. Speaking of Bud, let's talk about her in more detail. Bud is a thief, and she comes with the standard thief set of Steel and Lock Touch. She also comes with the Forester skill, which is really appreciated because it gives her 6 move on this map and speeds it up somewhat. The more interesting part about Bud is that she learns Paragon if you're patient enough to get her to level 10, and then at level 40 she's actually capable of learning Astra, which is a completely ridiculous skill for a non-combatant to learn. If you're familiar with Fire Emblem in general, you'll be aware that Astra is a proc skill that turns a single attack into 5, and having that kind of combat skill on a thief is absolutely hilarious, but obviously not at all relevant to this kind of run. So Bud is not going to be all that useful overall, because we already have plenty of thieves, but she will have a role in one later map. We are now getting into position to wall off Bud and force her to deploy in a certain place, and in the process we're cleaning up the last couple of Pegasus riders with my mounted units. Now I guess is a good time to mention that Bud will only be freed on this map if you recruited Narcus back in Chapter 9. Narcus's influence over the course of the game is quite interesting. He actually reminds me a little bit of Kath from The Binding Blade, in terms of how often you have to deal with him before you are able to permanently recruit him. Honestly, this kind of long-term influence on the plot is something that I really miss from older Fire Emblem games, and I'd really like something similar to this to come back, although my hopes are not high, because the newer games seem to focus more on characterization through text dumping rather than through gameplay influence. On this enemy phase, I am able to get Vega to bait over one of the remaining 2 armored knights in the front of Rochelle, and he gets a lucky double critical hit in order to 1-round KO him. But unfortunately, he is not going to be able to pull out that last armored knight, because we suddenly have to deal with the nomads who are on the other side of the castle. Bud has finally appeared, but one full move from her lands her exactly within range of the northernmost nomad. And because of an unfortunate miss from Samson on the previous enemy phase, all 4 of the nomads are still alive for us to deal with. So we have to be very careful and make sure that each of my 3 combat units in this area gets a 1-round KO against one of the nomads. Fortunately, I managed to pull this off thanks to Holmes's brave crossbow, and this time Samson does not miss his 90% listed tomahawk hit against the northernmost nomad, making Bud safe. The tricky part now is that both Plum and Lyria have to move towards Bud as quickly as they can, because in order to minimize the turn count on this map, both of them have to refresh Bud separately. We end up leaving Plum in range of the surviving nomad on this enemy phase. Fortunately, she is able to survive, and this maneuver allows Lyria to sing twice on this turn. Unfortunately, we don't manage to get any sing refresh procs on this turn, one of which would have been really nice in order to eliminate the nomad before he became a problem for this enemy phase. You might be surprised that I haven't had Katri transform into Neuron at all during this battle, given how fragile she is and how much of a risk I described the Pegasus Riders as being to the Squishy's survival. But unfortunately, Neuron's not actually that good here, because her Fierce Breath is not that useful in tight quarters due to the risk of it hitting my allies instead, and her regular breath not being very strong at all. In any case, Katri is much more useful using the Physic and Zombie staves through the course of this map, rather than being an extra damage dealer. Meanwhile, on the other side of the map, Bud is on the move, and I'm moving in a couple of my mounted units to help her. Neron is unfortunately not going to be going anywhere, but Martel has a few more important roles to play before the map is over. So the enemy phase arrives, and Plum of course easily survives the steel bow hit from the Nomad. And now we need to move to start refreshing Bud with Lyria and Plum. Lyria's sing range is not quite sufficient to refresh Bud from where she is, so she is going to need to be danced by Plum on this turn, which means Bud is going to have to be danced by Plum on next turn. That makes a small problem, because Plum's movement is lower than Bud's, and she needs to be able to reach Bud after that second move. So we are going to have her dance Lyria from as far south as possible, while still allowing Lyria's sing effect to reach Bud on this turn. I kind of wish that I had managed to find a more aggressive strategy up here, so that I could have Lyria sing on this turn and then Plum dance for Bud to get all of the refreshing out of the way in one go, but unfortunately that didn't happen. So there's another possible improvement for anyone looking to LTC this game. Now, if you've been paying attention to Samson, you might have noticed that he has reached level 10 on this map, and we are in fact about to promote him. He promotes into a warrior, which unfortunately, unlike most of its appearances in Fire Emblem games, does not have access to bows in this game. However, it does give Samson a nice little all-around stat boost, which is going to allow him to stay relevant for a couple more maps. In particular, that +1 move is going to be very handy. On this previous enemy phase, the last wave of Pegasus Rider reinforcements on this map showed up in the lower right. Fortunately, they are too far away to be of any risk to any of our units. I would have used them for Martel experience points, but she has reached the level cap at this point, and so we're not going to do that, and instead she's going to head in a different direction. And that brings us to the second Sing rig of the game, and this is the first time that I am using Sing to refresh someone at 2 range. As I mentioned, I was quite slow to get my 2 refreshers up to where they needed to be, and the fact that this strategy still worked out is a testament to the power of both having a ranged refresher and having that refresher be able to be refreshed by a different refresher. So this game lets you do some really silly things sometimes. This particular Sing rig wasn't actually as bad as the previous one. In fact, even though I had to do this twice due to having to go back to get Seafarer for Plum, it still took me much less time for both of those rigs than it did for the one back in Chapter 16. Martel is picking off the last Armored Knight between Bud and Rishel. That's disappointing because she's level capped and thus doesn't get any experience points from it, but she is the only one who's in a realistic position to do so reliably. Unfortunately, taking this kill also puts Martel within range of Rishel's Meteor Tome, so we're losing another use of that before we could ever have a chance to use it. The silly thing here is that Rishel and Martel are actually first cousins, and they know each other very well. So it's kind of strange that Rishel is so keen to attack his beloved cousin, but I suppose it's possible that he just doesn't recognize her flying over there due to how far away she is. In any case, Martel is more than capable of taking that gigantic fireball to the face, though I imagine she's going to have words for Rishel after the battle once we recruit him. So now basically everything relevant that is difficult on this map has been done. As you can see, the second wave of nomads has not spawned in yet, and it never is. So we just have to dance Bud over to recruit Rishel, and once that's done, there's no real reason to hang around. As I mentioned, we're pushing it a bit, so Lyria is going to have to squeeze in one last Sing, because she needs to get to 50 Sings by the time we reach Chapter 27. And with all of that done, we now just have to clean up the boss. Now, the boss seems kind of scary due to his brave sword, but Rishel is in fact, thanks to Sunflame, fully capable of surviving 4 hits from that thing. And that means that the optimal strategy for this, which I really wish I'd actually done, is to have Rishel attack him at 1 range instead. Ahab has no healing and no 2 range, and there are no physic enemies wandering around to support him in that. So he has no way of attacking Bud, and that means that he would instead attack Rishel at 1 range, and Rishel 2-hit KOs him, so that would spell Ahab's death. Giving Rishel this boss kill is a big boost to him because it gets him a long way towards level 10. On this run though, I decided I didn't want to risk the AI randomly deciding not to do what it had consistently done previously, so instead I fished for a Terra proc with Rishel, and when that failed, we just have Martel swoop in to finish the job. Unfortunately, again, Martel is far too damaged to safely take the kill with the crit Iron Lance, but she's perfectly capable of using the Levin sword to finish Ahab off. And so we complete this extremely lengthy chapter in 8 turns. And Martel is going to take the boss's brave sword off his corpse. The Brave Sword is going to be very useful on our sword using units in the upcoming chapters, and that includes Martell herself. So now we only have one small obstacle between Holmes and his second reunion with Runan, and that is going to be what happens in the next video. I will see you then.